So when it comes to studying your target language, you could do one of two things. You can raise the ceiling, your greatest potential, or you can raise the floor. So how do you decide which of these that you want to focus on, and what do you do to focus on them? I like to think of the ceiling as your active knowledge in the language, which basically means that it's everything that you know in the language, vocabulary, grammar, that you can use actively when you're speaking the language. It's stuff that you know off the top of your head that you can pull out in a conversation without any hesitation. Your passive knowledge, or the floor, is basically your total knowledge in the language. It's not necessarily something that you'd be able to pull out in a conversation, but if someone else said it to you or you read it somewhere, you'd probably understand it. So in order to raise the ceiling, what you need to do is you need to review the material that you know so that it makes the transition from your passive vocabulary to your active vocabulary. It means that you'll be able to perform better in your target language because you know more things actively. So when you're performing in your target language or speaking, even though you may understand, you're going to be performing somewhere down here as opposed to performing somewhere up here. And the goal is to perform up here. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, our active knowledge and our passive knowledge would be like this. We would be able to use everything that we know in the language, but the thing is it's not really like that. Our passive knowledge will always be broader than our active knowledge. But this is totally okay, because as long as you have clear goals in mind for what you want to accomplish in the language, you can take the information in your passive knowledge that you would like to use actively and focus on that. So that way, you're raising the floor a little bit. That passive knowledge is moving over to your active vocabulary. So you're getting closer to that ceiling and your greatest potential in the language. This space is becoming smaller, and that's really what you want to have happen. And then of course, as you review and more information becomes active, your greatest potential also increases. So what you're doing is you're kind of doing this, and you do this by reviewing and working on things, and then your passive vocabulary also increases when you're exposed to more information in the language. So your overall understanding becomes greater, it becomes broader, you know more, and eventually you'll be able to transfer that to your active vocabulary, which is why these two kind of do this. So when you're deciding what you need to work on a language, you need to take a look at where your active vocabulary is and where your passive vocabulary is to see what you really need to work on. If you don't have a very broad passive vocabulary, I mean, you don't really understand all that much when you hear it, you should probably work on increasing that. Whereas if you have a pretty broad understanding, but you're just not able to use the things that you need to use in a language, then maybe review would be a better option, because you can raise that ceiling and you could use more of that material that you know because it moves over to your active vocabulary. So that's that for this video. I have a longer blog post that talks a little bit more about this on Eurolinguiste.com, and I will include a link to that in the box below. But if you have any questions, you can leave me a comment as well. Thank you so much for watching. So what you're kind of doing, I'm going to start smaller.